So I wanted to start off by talking about my impression. Funny thing happened earlier. I have watched this film 4 times, and I confessed to Vishal, I was like, oh, that's just, those scenes weren't in what I watched before. Um, and I think what it is that the film is exactly how I introduced it to our in-person audience, is that for me, it was prose poetry put to film. It was a cinematic prose poetry. And I was reading all the Black spaces as if they were poetic enjambment, and these moments to like meditate on language. So image and language, sort of that tension, that image text tension was at play. And so what I wanted to think through, first of all, is the title of this movie is taken from a collection of poems from Sonia Sanchez that she was writing as a dedication to many people who have passed or transitioned from HIV/AIDS. And so I'd like maybe if you can tell us a little bit about the significance of the film, the significance of naming the film without using the question mark. Yeah, I'm also thinking about the house, the idea of the house with the lions, and the fact that the film has so many openings for viewers and so many openings in terms of political activism, kinship, friendship. Like where do you put your lions for this house that has so many openings?
I mean, when we were finishing the edit of the film, which was like March 2021, and I think it was like right as we were coming right up to like the finish line for it, I asked vqueeram for help titling the film, because I think it had lived in in our edits as all these different names. Honestly, it was like a Mad Mind was one name, just because there was a song that kind of refers to the Mad Mind, that song Babra, which is kind of in the early part of the film. But it was a placeholder name, and we didn't have one. And so vqueeram suggested, "Does Your House Have Lions?" As coming from the Sonia Sanchez book of poetry. And I actually was not aware of the book of poetry. And then as I started to look into it and realized that on that first the first page of Sonia Sanchez's book is this sort of anecdote that's reprinted, and it refers to Rahsaan Roland Kirk, who's a jazz musician, and a kind of an anecdote. The anecdote is written by Joel Dorn, who is Rahsaan Roland Kirk's producer, and it's basically sort of, I'll just kind of paraphrase it. It's about Joel having bought a house, and Rahsaan says to him, "Did you buy a house with lions? Get yourself a house with lions." Like outside of a post office and a school. I can't remember what the two other institutions are. And so as soon as I heard it, I thought immediately of just the house, right? And what I loved is that the title was kind of acknowledging that the film was ultimately like kind of about this household in many ways. But then as we started to think about it more deeply, like the idea that that Sonia Sanchez is kind of taking a title from another artist's work, and it felt like this kind of conversation between artists of that might not even have a relationship to each other, and it just sort of felt like there was all these kind of ideas kind of opening up with it, and so yeah. But I just loved it as a title, and I think very quickly the idea to not have the question mark kind of was resolved. Like I was sort of like, well, we always knew that it would refer back to Sonia Sanchez and then refer back to Rahsaan Roland Kirk. But by dropping the question mark, it kind of allowed it to be this other sort of presence. But Vikram, yeah.
Thanks for that question, and thanks to Vishal for kind of elaborating that. I might want to say two things really quickly. One is that Sonia was not Sonia was kind of an accident, but not one that happened just in the middle of the conversation with Vishal. Because before my two friends got imprisoned, they were reading Zami by Audre Lorde. And I wanted to kind of draw something from the circle of friends that uh, from Audrey's circle of friends. So I did want to kind of think about friendship even in kind of the method of this titling. And the second thing, as a friend of mine put to us, and we've written about this in a piece that Vishal and I co-wrote, is that there is a lie in lions. And we really appreciate that, because I think that the impulse of a film, or to read a film as telling truths rather than the lies we choose, is actually counterintuitive, right? Like the imagination that people in a cinema verite are kind of speaking from the heart, and this is the most kind of authentic and honest version, whereas what the camera actually allows is for a certain kind of lie to be choreographed. You can see two bodies sitting together, and you can imagine that there is intimacy there, even as they might not be able to say what they are willing to say to a camera to each other. And so it is in some sense, and remember that the lions in the Rasan court are not necessarily real lions, right? These are not lions that can particularly protect you when the police comes barging in. These are lions that are aesthetic, that are about a relationship to power, and about things denied to us. But they are not necessarily convincing, and they are not necessarily, and they kind of man the passage. And so instead of imagining the door as the only entry into a house, what would it mean to be introduced to a house from its passage? And so the film becomes about the passages it takes to sit beside one another. For Vishal to travel all across the world to come and see us, for Dhiren to travel from a very, very small and exceptionally marginalized and oppressed village to the city, and for whatever the passage that we might call trans might mean. And so then it becomes about the things we want to put in the way of our passage, as some kind of homage, as a certain kind of ornamentalism, and a certain kind of relationship to the other. Those who may not sit beside us but could see us from far, letting them know that we see them too. So maybe that's a short kind of answer.
No, I love that. I mean, there's so many. So from what you just said, there are three things that are running through my mind, but I'll do it in steps. So the first thing I'm struck with, in the first few scenes, also in literature written about the film, but even like the takeaway, the idea of friendship as methodology. And so, and there's a brilliant conversation that you're having with some of your friends, and you say, oh my gosh, like in academia is that terrible word that we call autoethnography, which is in fact what I do, right? And I love that your friend was saying like she's working on a research methodology that's called like active research, right? In which the subject, the researched and the researched are one and the same. And so I'm thinking about friendship as method and methodology. If we look beyond sort of that global north, parachuting in, extracting information, setting up collaborations, which are asymmetric in a sense, right? What can you talk a little bit about friendship as being the model or the goal, or again, like an opening to collaboration? What if we just like scratched out the word collaboration, and if the goal was that your research must be imbued with a sense of friendship?
I mean, I think it's really important to kind of to illuminate and highlight those sort of asymmetries, right? Because those could have been and were present in many ways in, from the minute of our meeting. And I think, I mean, what I loved about our friendship as it began was that, is that in a way, vqueeram would joke around about these things, right? Like, me being this academic, that, I mean, at the time, I didn't have a job, when we met. I was an adjunct lecturer, but still, like, there was such a kind of cliche, right, in me kind of coming to India and doing a form of research. But importantly, we were introduced by a mutual friend, and it was very much the way queers meet each other, which is you just say to another queer, like, who should I know? And they say, here, this is someone you should know. And so, in a sense, like, whatever it is that we ended up making, and it's still an ongoing collaboration. I would say that this film is one iteration of it, and I think in a sense, like, I don't even think that either of us really chose it actually consciously, but we became kind of dutiful to the friendship, and that became I think the guiding force, right? Because I think what's important to really say is that even though, yes, like I was wanting to make an artwork, at many points along the stage, it's sort of I also had sort of resolved in myself that this might never become a thing, right? Because what it really was just a kind of documentation of this friendship, and I started to just see it as this kind of like potentially like living archive that we were going to produce together, right? And I think very quickly I asked vqueeram. I don't know if I asked, but we, through conversation, kind of like I wanted to disassemble this kind of authorship model as well, or at least to make sure that whatever we did was kind of co-authorship based upon that, right? Because what vqueeram was bringing was so much more than being a subject in a traditional sense. Like I was, the way that we were communicating with each other and sort of learning to, in a sense, live with each other, right? Like was already undoing, these kind of the idea of like filmmaker and subject or something. And so becoming more dutiful to the friendship, which has had its challenges. I mean, it's been as challenging as any friendship is, right? Like we don't always see eye to eye, and we've gone through many phases, and what I think is also important to say is that friendship is unlike kinship in that there's nothing that holds it together. Like we could walk at any point, right? And that sort of interesting tension, like, or in a certain way, I think actually produces something that I think is very productive in a way. But I don't know. I would love to hear vqueeram's thoughts about that.
I think Vishal said a lot of what I wanted to say, but I'll say, especially in terms of, say, I'm going to just kind of maybe think about the push that Cathy is suggesting. We think about what if collaboration was to be replaced by friendship. And I'm thinking about what does then friendship allow that collaboration doesn't. And I'm actually thinking if part of the difficulty of collaboration is about how, and as is the difficulty of almost any relation, the difficulty of having difficult conversations. And I am not invested in a model of academic writing or academic engagement or an engagement with the world in which critique does not come from a place of both generosity and radical capacity to hate. And I think friendship is the only space where actually both of those could work together. And I might just kind of give an example to that. It's like, say, for example, like the idea of the bitch slap, right? The idea of like being able to slap someone across the face when they say something annoying, but it's not coming from a place of power or oppression, but coming from a place where you need to be shaken a bit for you to find your ground again, right? And I don't think that beside intimacy, beside the stake in another person's life, you will demand something like that. To suggest that what someone is doing in their life is so hurtful that the only way I can kind of grapple with it is to slap you across the face and say, no, snap out of it, or change something about this, and so I feel like, and especially for projects, artistic projects or collaborations, it's so important to be able to suggest some of these things, suggest a kind of hurt which is not necessarily garnered towards the outside, but it's the kind of diminishing from the inside. And those are not conversations that we are necessarily trained in, right? And somehow the infrastructures of other forms of kinship, from marriage to sexual desire, etc., don't necessarily enable that those conversations. It's precisely the lack of infrastructure in friendship that allows us to improvise it, but allows us to also have deep stakes in the other person. And so it's really important to be able to have some of those conversations every now and then, and to be forgiven for our lack of ethics or the excesses of hurting someone, and the possibility of forgiveness in return. I think that those are, I can't think of any other kind of relationship where that's a placeholder. But again, because of the lack of infrastructure, improvisation can also be destruction, can also come untethered. And so it's not as if, and like Vishal is saying, there's always the kind of impulse to leave, etc. And so I think there's something generative about that. I think that there is something generative about the difficulty of friendship that allows difficult conversations to happen, or for unlikely things to happen, which I think precisely because other relationships have such deep infrastructure, whether it's the academic researcher researched infrastructure of marriage or whatever, they're so deep, they're so historical, that they're bound to interrupt your voice. And I feel like it is precisely the lack of sovereignty of our voice in friendship that allows for something else to happen. And maybe if I made any sense, I can stop there.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. It absolutely dovetails in, and my mind is just going through the script, because the closed captioning was there, and one thing many things stuck out, but we're talking about there being an overvaluation of sort of like this global or Western consensus of feeling, and how you want more value to rage, but even more value to joy. And so it actually makes sense for the bitch slap that you mentioned. It wasn't captured on film, but what was captured on film were these moments of joy. And so I'm thinking about, so this question's a little bit robust, and you can enter anywhere that you would like. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about, and this is what I'm calling like the fantastic mundane moments of the film. And what I mean by fantastic mundane are when we use elements from like our natural world to emulate or create a fantasy. And there are these quiet snatches in the film where people are lip syncing, where Herein is talking about his dating experiences. The sunset seems to have another character in the film, because it shows up 3 times, especially when Vishal, you're calling and they're like, oh no, you gotta go. It's, like the sun's about to set in 10 minutes. We're trying to experience the magic moment, right now. And then there was a particular scene, and I'm glad I had I was watching it on my laptop because I had to freeze it to see what website you were on after you were dancing in the fabulous 2-piece lingerie. And so you were on Chatterbait, which I could not look up. I could only look through Wikipedia because I didn't want my interwebs people to start tracking me as a challenge. But I was thinking about that scene, and it really paired well with the dinner scene with both you, where you both basically asked each other, and the film cuts and neither one of you answers this question, which you ask, do you feel free, right? So I'm thinking about the fantastic mundane, I'm thinking about the register of joy, And can you speak about your individual and your sort of communal ideas of freedom? So is the screen like a site of freedom, right? Is the documentary camera a site of freedom? What were you doing with those moments, those snatches of life that weren't part of like the master narrative? Or maybe I'm over determining what your master narrative was. So can you both answer that? Do you feel free?
You start, please.
I can only answer that. Like, I'll try to answer that in relation to the camera particularly, because and I'm again going to borrow from the generosity of another friendship. We had a common friend, the most stunning Tamil writer, Anu Karutpragasam, moderate at one of our conversations. And the conversation began with Anuk kind of reviewing the film in some sense. And Anuk brought up something that I don't think I saw or was intentional about, which is that I often think of the camera as an instrument of capture, and this is something that you hear in Dhirend's kind of relationship to the archive, right? Like where in this kind of Jose Esteban Munoz kind of space where he's thinking about the archive as a space, as an enclosure, right? And so Anuk was kind of thinking about what are the strategies that both Dhiren and myself resort to in relation to this camera's impulse to capture. And so mine is kind of easier, which is that my impulse is to refuse. I am very tight-lipped. I am very tight-jawed. I am exceptionally kind of conscious of not just say the camera, but who could watch this like in Europe think about this. And that sometimes leads to a kind of deep struggle with Vishal, because Vishal constantly keeps saying you're imagining audiences, you're imagining their for example, their whiteness and so on and so forth, whereas the audiences could be many. And so my practice of freedom is the practice of refusal to the camera. Dhiren's, on the other hand, Anuk pointed out, is one of excess, where there is so much joy, there is so much pleasure, there is so much sexiness that it's almost impossible for the camera to not be overwhelmed and to surrender, right? And to almost have to give up its sovereignty, because it is meeting this demigod of oomph. And so really, in some sense, I think those at least become, which is not that they're not interchangeable. There are many moments where Dhiren is the quiet one and I'm the one kind of dancing in front of the camera. But I think of both of these as refusal and as maybe sexiness or sexy excess as like strategies of freedom with relationship to the camera that we struggle with. But I think all of us, at least in the film, and I know from also your work, that we are committed to a practice of freedom. We are committed to practices to be what Christina Sharp might call undisciplined. But I don't think that we're always the most articulate about them. I think freedom is something, if it governs you or if it drives you, then I don't think intention is necessarily the space I would go to for its articulation. I think and that's where the viewer becomes slightly useful, because someone else might be able to tell you something that you're doing that you don't really realize and cause a moment of friction or thoughtfulness.
Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of this question of freedom, like, I mean, I love in that footage where I just asked the question so kind of idiotically. I'm like, do you feel free? Because we had at that point traveled from Delhi to Bombay, and I was feeling just some freedom from having left Delhi because I, and so I just asked it, and of course vqueeram just comes back with this totally, kind of like kind of bitch, bitch slap back, like, are you serious? Do you actually feel free? But I think, I think I'll speak to another part of the question around the kind of fantastical. I think in a way, in working with both vqueeram and Didane, I realized that we did have the opportunity to kind of to imagine the fantastical together, or that we, like that we could give these kind of opportunities, like for a sort of sexiness, or like, for like use the camera how you want it, and I think what's also interesting is that, there are definitely those moments where we sort of stage or give opportunity for like the lip syncing, or these kind of like moments of fantasy. And then I think what I found myself often doing, and this kind of goes a little off the, it's like, but I was fighting against both vqueeram and Didane's sort of impulse towards making themselves really beautiful for the camera, or like, getting dressed the way they wanted to. And I would be like, no, we're rolling now. Like we have, because I was sort of, in certain ways trying to also capture a little bit of a kind of naturalism, and which is, my own sort of problem as a filmmaker, right? That it's kind of like, I felt like that would give for more sort of authenticity. But I think that the fantastical is such an important question, because I think in the end, the film kind of allows for both, right? Like where it sort of it allows for these sort of moments of the fantastical, or of the beautiful, or whatever, of the pretty, in spite of some of the more intense moments of the film, right? And so, and I think that was a really interesting direction that vqueeram gave me once we realized that sort of storyline that included the incarceration of their housemates was going to become a part of the film. vqueeram was like, you are not going to make this journalistic, and you are not going to make this political. But actually, if you look at the footage, there's so much sort of in the kind of, there's so much more poetry in these sort of moments of us enjoying each other, right? And like actually pull those things out. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think I'll leave it there, but.
Yeah. I mean, okay, poetry. I mean, like all of your answers are dovetailing well into all of my curiosities about the film. And when I think of poetry, I think of language, I think of images, I think of vqueeram, you mentioned the ornamentalization of like certain things. So I couldn't help but like what I was like hailed with while I was watching this film, but particularly looking at you. It made me think of just like the way you were painting your fingernails, the lingerie, and I think I was called into thinking of Zora Neale Hurston's quote, "A will to adorn." When I saw you carry that container of yellow flowers in your in your home, in your space, and I was noticing sort of the preoccupation with the aesthetics of space, and so this also maybe jumps back a little bit to the question: do you feel free? And I'm thinking about space, and you said that your impulse to refuse, whereas Vishal's impulse is like the idea of freedom. Came in that moment of the passport, right? Like, why won't you get a passport? Why are you sending your mother to like Italy by herself? So can you talk about like your impulse to refuse as like a mode, and what that means about you staying in Delhi, staying in India, and like this will to adorn the space. And so that expression from Zora Neale Hurston comes from her thinking about the aesthetics of African American culture, but I just couldn't help but apply that to the way you were occupying space and using your body in traveling through public transportation, and also your refusal to leave India, even under conditions as ugly as the political conditions, as ugly as they are. So like I'm trying to reactivate that quote in terms of politics and the aesthetics that you insist upon.
Oh, that's such a beautiful question, and I'm so moved by it. Like, I want to stay with that question all week. I don't think I'll do it justice but thank you for that. Thank you for putting those two things together that I wouldn't have really. So appreciate that. Um, I don't know how to think about them together, really, because I really haven't. But so at least what I could say about say the Zora Neale Hurston quote or this kind of relationship to beauty, because I came across that quote in the Christina Sharp essay called "Beauty is the Method," and it's such a remarkable essay, and it's an essay I think I must have read like 120 times, as one does everything Christina Sharp. Um, but one of the things that I think is different from for some of us, and I can't really speak for more than some of us, is that beauty is also the oppressor. Um, and this is particularly true for trans people, where beauty can be another form of enclosure. And so and or say poor people, where one is like kind of judged for one's lack of capacity to adorn, or say in India especially, and you see this in a lot of anthropology that comes from this part of the world, where a certain kind of Brahmin aesthetic theory is how you understand the social. And so beauty either in terms of the demand to pass, or the demand to be accepted, or the demand to be understood, can all become forms of enclosure or lack of possibility. And I think and so part of the refusal to beauty, or part of beauty as a refusal, is to bend the oppressor, not so much as to break it, but just kind of bend it. I don't think that necessarily becomes a practice of freedom, but it does kind of open small moments of relief or reprieve, perhaps even repair, um, or if nothing else, joy. And so I think that there is something about uh, the method, about the question of method that Professor Sharp opens for us. And I think, but that method is also, if beauty is a method, then so is ugliness. And I think that there is something useful to hold the two things in tension with each other. I don't necessarily, I know people disagree with this, but I don't necessarily think of myself as a beautiful person. And we're not opening this up for debate right now. But I am interested in surrounding myself with a few beautiful things, or having a relationship to beauty, because ugliness does not foreclose the possibility of it. And so I am interested in what possibilities ugliness and beauty, when put next to each other, might open, right? And this is particularly true about, say, for example, Hijra folks, which are perhaps our first kind of relationship to transness in this city, where you see a person begging on the street by the red light, most kind of garish, or this kind of upper caste eye makeup, right? But the overdone red lipstick, the kind of slightly whitewashed foundation, etc., are because the figure, in order to be able to get something out of you, Hijra is relying on a relationship of power in a place where she is offered none. And that juxtaposition of the beautiful and the garish opens up something else for us. It opens up a possibility that wouldn't exist if we were to simply surrender to the terms of either beauty or ugliness, right? And I think that possibility to be disgusting and erotic at the same time is something that I think is close to a practice of freedom, because it refuses the binaries by which the world is organized. Um, and that And that it's part of that refusal of the binary that the passport conversation actually comes through, because it it is becoming increasingly impossible to live in this country, and I can't emphasize that enough. I am not the most threatened of people, but nevertheless, the everyday kind of um, the everyday kind of overwhelming of murder and violence, etc., is a lot. Um, and so, and one of the reasons I enjoy the film is that the film actually has far more mobility than I do. And it's an object that kind of travels irrespective of my passport, etc. There is a kind of it engineers a circulation that I refuse, right? And so this ability for parts of me to be treated, to be presented to someone, etc., is it suggests a possibility of existence that is not built on bodily autonomy and integrity. And I think I enjoy that about the image. And so maybe that's the relationship between the image and the beautiful and the passport. I hope I've answered some of this. I'm really sorry if I meandered.
No, you didn't. I mean, you left a lot of openings for Vishal to think about. And I know we need to switch to questions from our Zoom audience and from also inside the theater. But I still have like half of my questions are still unanswered, but I want to share you with other people. So I'll pause here, but I'm just wondering, Vishal, if you wanted to add anything to the question in terms of like maybe the filmmaking process. And I do have deeper questions for you about that.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I mean, this question of the passport question is just, and I think the reason I enjoy it in the film is that it's where you see kind of a part of the nature of our friendship is often like arguing, but where I'm like, no, come on, get a passport, let's go, you know, and I think that, you know, vqueeram, I mean, I love that scene because it's something that, you know, from this perspective, the first world perspective, it's very hard to kind of understand. It's hard to understand. Why would you not want to come join us? You know, and I think I really, I think that vqueeram's sort of refusal of mobility, I think, is something that is, it's sort of poetic. It's political. It's a number of different things. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the filmmaking process and this kind of, I think what vqueeram mentioned, you know, towards the end of their answer about the sort of the circulation of the image that sort of happens kind of globally. And I think that that's something that I was thinking about a lot, right? Like I think I was, and I think like through the editing process, I was trying to kind of make sense of all of the energies that were at play, like in this material that I managed to you know, capture with these incredible friends. So, you know, balancing these kind of energies of the harsh, I don't think of anything in the film as ugly other than, you know, the sort of fascism, right? But to try to balance these energies, right? Like of these sort of uglier truths, right? Of, you know, people being incarcerated and sort of held, you know, by the state, but then, you know, these sort of other moments, and sort of trying to do this kind of balance in that regard felt really important. And I think also this question of, you know, I mean, I think it's really interesting when vqueeram kind of mentions the sort of hijras of Delhi, but, you know, this kind of this question of the representation and what it means to sort of represent queer people, or, you know, trans folks, like in cinema. I mean, I think these were all questions that were really, I mean, luckily I didn't have to think of those questions because I was just dealing with friends. So this actual question of representation was one that I could kind of you know, put to the side and just kind of edit the film that we wanted to see. But I'm going far off. I think it's a beautiful question, and I'm you know, I think in a sense, I think vqueeram's answering of the question is more useful than anything that I could add to this. But maybe we should open it up and, you know, to questions from the audience.
Yes, we have one question from the audience that I'm toggling back and forth from. This question comes from a graduate student. I believe they're a graduate student in the Department of Linguistics, Dosandri Mendoza. And I'll add a little bit to this because I think this may have been addressed, but you can go a little bit further. They thank you for visiting us virtually, and they thoroughly enjoyed watching the film. I was interested in the discussion of different forms of love in the film, including vqueeram's call to value other forms of intimacy and love, such as those found and shared through friendship. Can you both perhaps speak to the relationship between you, all that formed in the filming process? I saw glimpses of these intimate moments between the interactions through the calls and the discussions of when things were missteps or complicated, etc. As someone interested in participatory arts, I'm fascinated by the decisions to keep these moments in relation to your own experiences with intimacy amongst you all in the filmmaking. And then one of the things that I'll add to this so that it's not, so we can maybe expand upon this, is I was thinking about the sort of intertextual or intermedial moment where you refer to The City Beautiful. I think it's the documentary The City Beautiful, Rahul Roy's film, which talks about, as vqueeram says, the soft masculinity of male friendships between. So I'm thinking of that as like a trace from that film to this film, and also reiterating Dosandri's interest in about the participatory arts and those moments in the filming process.
I mean, in regards to the Rahul Roy film about soft masculinity, I mean, in a way, I think there was this. I mean, I can't speak too much to this kind of idea of like the soft masculinity. I mean, it's kind of just a quip, it's a joke, and in a way, like they're not throwing shade at the other film, but they're kind of like they're almost like doing this challenge of like, don't let this film be that, or maybe trying to make some kind of distinction between them. And I think we put that moment in the film kind of just to sort of make reference to that kind of joke, but. In terms of the student's question regarding the kind of the process of making the film in relationship to this kind of question of friendship, like, I mean, it's kind of important to note that a lot of we were becoming friends as because we had a reason to spend time together, and so a lot of these scenes that are built are actually us just spending time together and just saying, like, let's keep the camera present, right?
Thank you for that. And thank you for that question from the audience. And I'm so glad to be here also. So glad that you like the film. I think that part of, and I think I did perhaps suggest that part of what allows those things to kind of stay, those kinds of missteps. I think what is useful about having them is precisely that there will be a few in friendship, and I think that we wanted to, or I think at least in the way in which the film has been edited, it suggests that the kind of overemphasis on friendship as a radical space for repair might actually be misplaced itself, and that actually we might end up hurting each other, we might end up being insensitive, we might step on a few toes, not just our own, but also of something sacred to the other person, etc. So I think I am interested in suggesting that actually intimate spaces, and especially spaces of care and repair, are also spaces of police and violence and and harm. And I think that there's something, I think we lose something if we don't actually grapple with that head on. I think at least in politics, one of the things that I find myself constantly hitting a wall against is when people are unable to have a conversation, a difficult one, right? And so instead of and we don't know what to do in a place where someone has hurt someone or someone has harmed someone. And I think the question of abolition is really this question of what to do, how to have that difficult conversation. And so I think that the reason why Ramoy's film exists or is cited, or say we have that conversation about Vishal kind of saying something perhaps insensitive, or there might be my impulse to refuse love, is all of those are built because I don't think we want to refuse our intimacy with violence, our capacity to do violence to others, right? And so even the most kind of vulnerable of us, even those of us who come together in joy, what does it mean to kind of leave spaces open to violence rather than say, no, these are safe spaces, right? Or these are safe containers. And I think especially because of the relationship between Dhiren and myself, where I come from a community and Dhiren comes from the oppressed caste, I don't think I can, even in the most kind of deepest, the most intimate, the most kind of day-to-day friendship or possibility of care, can I refuse the way in which history might speak through me, a history of violence, right? And I think there's something for something productive or generative about the way in which violence desovereignitizes us, or history might desovereignitize us through violence. It says something about our limits. It says something about how our imperfections, and it's lovely to kind of build from there. What does it mean to build a space of joy from violence rather than its kind of antithesis and opposition? And I think that's where some of those things might come together. I hope that kind of helped answer some of those.
Yeah, that was beautiful. It also applies. I feel like you could, like, I could just put you on a calendar and like you would have like quotes for me every day, like like having thinking about safe spaces and safe containers, and maybe interjecting joy as an afterlife to violence, having worked through it, right? Having had those difficult conversations, and joy is a goal and a possibility, right? It's something we can strive for together, right? That's like the fugitive dream, right? To be there, right? Vishal.
Oh, I love that idea of the afterlife, joy as the afterlife. I love that. Thank you so much for that. That's gorgeous. I need that on a calendar or a t-shirt.
Oh, we have a question from the audience. Fantastic.
Thank you for your beautiful film, and I find it poignant and I find it timely. And Professor Thomas, thank you for promoting friendship. Where are you, Professor Thomas? Are you on the screen, in your office, or here in the theater?
I'm upstairs from where I'm probably a minute away from where you're standing.
It doesn't matter. You have there's a feeling on campus that you're multidimensional and that you're multifaceted, but that's what a diamond is.
I'm a feral academic.
I find it poignant in that it brings so many different people together, people from UCLA, from Goa, from Bombay, from Calcutta, and now here in Santa Barbara. And I find it timely because, of course, we're fighting our own battles here with you-know-who. And vqueeram, you mentioned Muti. Matter of fact, you coined the term multimedia. How's it going with Muti over there? And I hope you're not afraid of getting acids thrown on your face, although I have that feeling too sometimes. Thank
Indeed.
you.
I think I don't really know how I feel. And, Vishal and I are currently working on a project around disassociation as a form of relationship to grief. Because I really like living in this country has become really difficult. It's not easy to have a relationship to to what is happening to people literally like to our most kind of like to next people sitting next to you. Like it's this and so I really I'm trying to think through with Vishal in this kind of project that we were trying to work something out of. Trying to think if numbness, if disassociation, if there is something generative about the desire to stay in bed a little bit longer. And I know that a lot of queer desire has gone into beds, but it involves a lot of frenetic hyperactivity and so on. But what would it mean to think of now a kind of queer sexual universe of the single? I'm not thinking of the one, but of the single, of the desire to be left alone, of trying to, in the enclosure, perhaps trying to find some moments of silence and sleep and rest. And this got activated for me, particularly during the pandemic. But it's also what allows us to survive another day in fascism. And so I want to, I don't think I know how to survive this. And so I have lowered the frequency of what survival looks like. I can't live with heightened awareness. I can't live with consciousness and knowledge. I can't live with constantly recognizing the intimacy of threat and incarceration and violation. It's too much. And so part of survival has been to not disavow, but actually just disassociate and to lower the frequency of what makes survival possible. It's a far more horizontal plane of existence. A far more, I love the word feral, but I'm thinking more like a worm, like an existence at the level of a worm. And so on, where like gnawing and regeneration are tied to some kind of what Laurent Ballant calls attrition. And so I am kind of thinking about what Tina Camp might call this kind of lower frequency. And that's how one is surviving. I'm trying to not be overwhelmed, but I am overwhelmed. And so I'm trying to just kind of not be asked to do one more thing. And that's where one is really at. I don't know, because I don't know how to rest. That's also a big problem with me. So like I'm just able to kind of maybe change registers or frequencies or tonalities, but I can't also sit back. And so I'm trying to think if there is something there in what we are collectively feeling, not just myself.
Thank you all for being with us.